never settle. That's the motto of OnePlus, and their early phones broke into the impossible phone market by not settling, with flagship level phones at a fraction of the price. And they gained a super loyal fan base, but they've evolved over the years. And this new OnePlus 10T is their attempt to get back to their roots. It's a great phone with great specs and a really great price. And that's the key, an affordable price. You see, OnePlus's loyal fans have been drifting away from the brand as prices have gone up and up every single year to the point that OnePlus was kind of just another flagship phone company like Samsung or Apple selling $1,000 phones. But this new OnePlus 10T aims to get back to that sweet spot with the best Android chip on the market and just for around $650. So we're talking about a fast, smooth experience with a great 120Hz display, an incredibly fast charging, a fast processor, and a very, honestly, surprisingly low price. But does this sound too good to be true? OnePlus phones always did, but in this video, we're gonna dig into this and see if this really is a flagship killer once again. So the OnePlus 10T. I've been using this phone for a few days now, and there's definitely a lot to like about this phone. And we'll talk about that throughout this video, but I've also identified the compromises that they made. Now, before we get into those, let's start off with my favorite aspects of this phone. Starting off with the front, the theme here, and actually throughout a lot of this video, is fast. That's always the theme with OnePlus. They're giving you things that are very fast. For one, we have a fast display. Smooth 120 Hz, it's a 6.7-inch 10-bit color display with a hole punch camera on the top that really looks nice in all lighting. Fantastic color, great dynamic range on here. Like overall, a really pleasant display to look at and very fast and smooth as well. On top of that, we're getting an in-screen fingerprint sensor, which is also very fast. This is an optical fingerprint sensor, and although I don't like how it's a little bit too low, like I wish it was a little bit higher, it's still incredibly fast. You barely touch it, and you signed in almost instantly. So those are two fast things just looking at the front of this. The aspect ratio, you'll notice, is a bit taller on this phone compared to something like an iPhone or even many other phones out there. And while that is great for reading or for scrolling through things, and of course for one-handed use to reach across the phone, it can be difficult for some people to reach higher up on the phone. So like I have relatively large hands, and if I reach, like I normally can't unless I kind of extend my pinky down and then I can reach the top. So I think a lot of people will be using two hands to access anything on the top third of the phone. Especially because even though I do like this interface quite a bit, one thing that they don't do quite as well as Samsung, who also has some pretty tall phones, is Samsung likes to make things more one-handed accessible. So if you swipe down to settings, for example, Samsung puts them down here so you can reach them with one hand. OnePlus doesn't quite do that. And so it looks great, but keep in mind if you want to change your Bluetooth settings from the little drawer on the top, you might be using two hands for that. I also noticed that OnePlus is kind of catering to fans a little bit more again. Compared to a lot of other phones that have been removing things, OnePlus is still including things like, for example, a pre-installed screen protector. It's great. You don't have to worry about bubbles. You don't have to worry about buying one on Amazon. We all get one anyway, and so it's nice to already have that on the phone. In addition to that, they're giving us other things like a charger in the box. And speaking of charging, that's the next fast thing with this phone. On the bottom, of course, we've got USB Type-C, no headphone jack, no surprise there, but we're able to charge this with an absolutely incredible speed. This is able to accept up to 150 watts, which is, I can't even comprehend. Most other phones are less than half of that. And this right here is able to charge from 0% all the way up to 100% in 19 minutes. 19 minutes, 0 to 100. I mean, I can't imagine that you'd even want it to be any faster than that. That's absolutely amazing, and I don't know how it doesn't explode. This also has 4,800 milliamp hours in the battery, so easily getting through, from my experience, about a day and a half, depending on how much you're pushing it, how bright the screen is, and things like that. Now, with that ultra-fast charging, there was one little compromise, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second, but let's talk about what's under the hood while we're at it. This has another fast thing, a very fast processor. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 Plus is the fastest chip you can get for an Android device. Now you can either get 8 gigs of RAM or 16 gigs of RAM, and what OnePlus claims to be the largest cooling system in any of their phones ever. And for that charging, you pretty much need it. Now I mentioned that this was $650, a very low price, and of course that's for the base model, which is 128 gigs of storage and 8 gigs of RAM. But during the pre-sale, you can actually get the free upgrade to the 16 gigs of RAM and 256 of storage for the exact same price. So a free upgrade, still $650, and that is where I think the good deal really is. So those are the highlights that we typically see with OnePlus, right? Everything being very, very fast on here. The fast display, fast processor, fast charging, all the speed that you're not going to see on a lot of other phones, especially not near this price. But we never finished talking about the design of this phone. So let's flip over the phone. There are two colors. There's a glossy green one, and then of course this matte black one. And it has kind of a fun texture. I'm trying to figure out the best way to describe this. I think the best way to describe it is like a plastic version of a cast iron pan. I think that's kind of how I view this texture here. And the rails are not really anything that exciting, but they are flat on the top and bottom, so you're able to actually stand the phone up on a table. I think that's cool. I like that design. Kind of keeps it a little bit more compact. But you'll notice one thing on the rails. On the left side, we don't have the switch. The classic switch we've seen on so many OnePlus devices, as one of the only Android devices to have the toggle between silent and notifications, vibrate sound, right? That was such a great feature that I always liked about OnePlus phones that otherwise you only see on iPhones. And they took it away from this one. I thought it was a way to cut costs. I still think it might be a way to cut costs, but according to OnePlus, it was so that they could have room for the massive charging setup on the inside. In order to get that 150 watt charging, they said they needed that extra space and they couldn't fit the architecture for that switch. So leave a comment below. Let me know which you would prefer, if you would rather have a switch on there or 150 watt charging versus before they probably had about 80 watt charging they could probably fit on here. But I don't know. For me personally, I would rather have the switch and 80 watt charging. And looking at the back one more time, you'll notice the camera setup is very similar to the OnePlus 10 Pro, but it doesn't say Hasselblad this time. So let's get into a camera test and see how they look. There is a 50 megapixel primary rear lens, which in my opinion does a really good job, captures great color, good dynamic range, and this is a lens we've seen on many other phones in the past. Then there's an ultra-wide lens, which is a little bit of a lower quality. It's not quite as good as the main lens, and it is limited to only shooting 1080p, unlike the primary rear lens. And then there is no telephoto lens on here, which means we're capped out at up to 10x zoom with the primary rear lens, 50 megapixels, just digitally zooming in. So that is a little bit of a drawback in my opinion. I really do like using a telephoto lens, and at this price, you could find some other cameras that did have, or other phones that did have a telephoto camera on there. Flipping over to the front, the selfie camera is also limited to 1080p, but it does a pretty decent job. Again, good with dynamic range, and even in the brightest daylight standing outside, it still did a good job of kind of showing everything behind me, as well as showing my face without being way too blown out. So I was very impressed by that. The rear lens also does have an improved night mode, and looking at this, just a very dark basement with a drum set, it looks like it's broad day. And honestly, like, you can't tell that it was even remotely dark in this environment. Alright, so here's a sample video with the front-facing camera. Despite being 1080p, it actually does a pretty decent job. Dynamic range, pretty decent there. A little bit of blown out clouds in the sky. Now for a rear video test, this is incredibly stable. I'm walking and it looks like it's on a gimbal. If we get close to something, you'll have a pretty nice natural focus on there, a nice bokeh in the background. Overall, the primary lens does a really good job. Now if we zoom in, let's say we want to zoom into this, I can very easily zoom up to, I believe, 10x, as you can see right there, or we can kind of slowly go back to our primary lens and we cannot zoom out any further. If we reduce the quality to 1080p, we will be able to go to the ultra wide lens, and from here it looks like we're able to zoom in to the other lens, and it does switch pretty seamlessly, but you have to be in 1080p to do this. Alright, so realistically, I wish these cameras were better. The ultra wide, only 1080p is pretty limiting in my opinion for this price. 4K is good on this one at least, but even this lens, especially compared to like the iPhone or the Pixels, doesn't take like the best photos. But it's good enough, but I wish it was a little bit better. So next, let's actually get into a speaker test. Now, I've always been a pretty big fan of the OnePlus interface. They've made some changes recently, but I still really like what they're doing with this. And even though we don't have the switch on the left side, we can still hit the power button and get a pretty nice array of tools here to change the volume of different aspects, as well as, and this is what I think is really cool, changing the media output as well. So you can choose if you're playing by Bluetooth speakers or other Bluetooth devices, or on this phone speaker as well. And so that is super useful, especially if you're on a phone call or if you're in a party and you want to watch a video and not play it on a speaker. It's so convenient to be able to do that. Of course, we've got our widgets on here and a lot of OnePlus things that I can talk about in another video if you're interested in that interface. But overall, the OnePlus 10T. Did OnePlus actually get back to their roots? I would say in many regards, yes, right? So there's pros with this. You're getting a fast chip, you're getting a fast display, you're getting fast charging. It's very, very smooth and really a great experience while still being very affordable. But you have some compromises. Really only the primary rear lens is good in my opinion, so if you're not taking just standard 1x shots, it's not gonna be the best camera. No telephoto, and the ultra-wide's not that great. In addition to video, you're only getting 4K if you're shooting with the primary rear lens. The ultra-wide and the front-facing only shoot 1080. There's also no slider switch. I think that's a little bit of a drawback in my opinion, but overall, for this price, the speed and the experience you're getting, I think when you're really focusing on that, this phone feels a lot more like a OnePlus phone in my opinion. I know other people are gonna say OnePlus is getting further away from their roots by removing that switch, but I think that they're all about the speed, and this really emphasizes speed. So leave a comment and let me know what you think about this new device. If you enjoyed the video, consider liking and subscribing. I'm Mike O'Brien. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.